I am here with Ben Wales, who's the owner of the Wilderness Fitness and Coworking in Minneapolis. Are you in Minneapolis proper? Like describe. Okay.
Yep, right in the heart of Minneapolis in Uptown.
Okay. In Uptown. Got it. I know the folks from Fueled Collective, which used to be Coco, wait, I think that was their original name. They've been around for a long time.
Yeah, you got the story right. Yeah, it was previously Coco. I believe they were the very first co-working space in Minnesota, and now they're Field
Yes,
Collective.
totally. Yeah. I know Kyle and hold on. I haven't had all my coffee yet, so I'm blanking on the other one. Kyle and it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, thank you for joining us. I have so many questions for you. I cannot wait to dive in. So for everybody listening, Ben emailed me with a business question and I was like, what is this co-working and fitness space that he has? I want to know everything about it. So I said, Ben, can we talk about your business question? But first, can we just record a podcast and I can dive into what you're up to? So thank you for agreeing to do that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the thing we're focused on is that you're combining fitness and co-working, and we'll put a link to your website and Instagram in the show notes so that people can take a look. Because for me, like visualizing it, I was like, what is happening here? So tell us your story. What did you do before you did this? And how did you decide to combine fitness and co-working?
Yeah, I've been in the fitness industry for a long time, for over a decade now. I'd been a personal trainer, a group fitness instructor, and then for the last 6 years, a gym manager. And so that was where the idea kind of started to bounce around in my head, because I was seeing, and maybe you've experienced this too, is where the gym culture in particular, kind of in the US, is very like come in, work really hard, sweat, and then leave. And I felt like some gyms are amazing with how they build their community, but others it's very like drop in and then leave. And also it feels like people can work hard in the gym and still be really unhealthy with the rest of their life,
Totally.
especially
Yes.
in the workplace. So I was starting to think about those things. And then at the same time, I was reading like the Blue Zones books. I don't know if you've heard of that at all. So
Totally.
yeah, they visit
What's the
different
author's name?
places.
I'm trying to remember. I follow him a little bit. Yeah,
Dan Buettner, I
that's
think
right.
is what, yeah.
Yep.
I keep trying to, I'm like, I really want to talk with him, but it hasn't happened yet. But I'd love to tell him that we based a lot of concepts that, he talks about in our space. So that was part of it. Blue zones are places where people live longer and often they're happier. And one of the big takeaways from that was that the environment that they're in is what shapes their decisions, whether they think about it or not. So
Yeah.
I thought it'd be wonderful to make an environment where healthy choices were the easiest ones and people would be happier in the space. They'd form connections with their other members over a shared interest. And also, obviously, it'd be a healthier environment for everyone who comes in the space.
So the gym that you managed wasn't yours. You were an employee, like a W-2, an employee.
Yep. Yeah. So when I
you
joined
percolated this idea and then you decided to like all in on your own.
Yeah, well, the way it worked out, so it's kind of an interesting story because that gym was a Ninja Warrior gym. It was like obstacle course type of training. And so I joined them when their very first location opened, and now they have, I think it's 5 locations in Minnesota, and they have another couple that are franchised all over the US. And while I was there teaching, the person I met was training for the American Ninja Warrior TV show. And his name was Bobby. And so we started training together and I was coaching him. And then I found out like his background. So he owned his own wedding videography company. And we just had a lot of shared interests in general. And he had thought about opening a coffee shop on his own, which has vague connections with co-working.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
And so we ended up planning the whole thing together. It was right at the start of the pandemic, actually, or I should say a month before that is when we were talking about it. And then all of that happened and we're like, oh, maybe we'll have to shelve this idea. But then as things have played out now, maybe it's actually the best case scenario.
So is he your business partner?
Yep. Yeah. So we're both 50-50 owners in the company.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah. Okay. So then I want you to tell me what the facility looks like. And I have to, people listening may know I talk about my story sometimes. So I have a little bit of a similar why when I started my co-working space. Have you heard me talk about it before?
Maybe, but I've listened to a lot of your podcast
I know, that's why
episodes,
I'm
so I'm
like,
not
I don't
sure.
totally talk about my own story that often, but
Yeah.
I always hate to be repetitive. But I kind of came from startup culture and had always wanted to do my own thing and became very passionate about kind of what you saw, like environment really impacts like how people eat and how people exercise. And I also just was super passionate about like people bringing like their whole selves to work and just get, and if like I want to work out during the day, making that super integrated. So when I started my first space in Chicago, I don't, you're in Minneapolis, so you may not spend much time in Chicago, but there's a place called the East Bank Club, which is where like Michael Jordan used to work out. And it's this huge complex where you could like live your whole life. You could work out, you could get your shoes shined, you could get your dry cleaning done, you could get your nails done, you could get super healthy. They're great, like cafe where you could get healthy stuff like to take away for lunch. And, they had on-site restaurants and it was not like crazy fancy, but it was just like all inclusive. And I just was like, but they don't have a workspace. And, if I was brave enough, I would have done something more comprehensive like that. So my first space was, our tagline was workplace and wellness. And we put in like a studio space. Because I probably just wasn't brave enough to go in all in like you did. But all the concepts that you're talking about, I wanted to have recess. I had worked it for a startup that had recess and I was like, I want to have recess. And I also didn't get brave enough to like make that like part of what we did. So anyway, I'm super passionate about what you do. So I want to hear, okay,
Yeah.
so you decide to do this business and you look for space. So what did you end up with? I'm looking at like a beautiful space behind you where you're recording. So if anybody's on YouTube, they can see your background. Yeah. Tell us about the facility.
Yeah, we looked for over a year for a space that was going to feel like the right fit. I mean, I think it's kind of a specialty type place that we were looking for, especially because too, there were a lot of just warehouse spaces that were a big open box.
Yeah.
But then the build out costs were just absolutely
Wild.
brutal
Right.
to consider.
Well, that's the thing. So I'm a huge CrossFitter and I always, to your point, like I love the community of CrossFit, but those gyms are usually ugly for just simplicity's sake, right?
Yeah,
Like
right.
dark, no windows until you pull up the garage door. And so, and to your point, if you wanted to add any infrastructure like offices, like you're starting from scratch, super expensive.
Yeah, that was the funny thing is initially we were looking in some neighborhoods where we felt like the neighborhood was really conducive to being a good fit, but everything we were looking at was warehouse space, which sometimes that's nice because it gives you a lot of control over what you want to do. And a lot of them had
Yeah.
huge floor to ceiling windows. So we were
Yeah.
excited about that. Some of them already had patios that were built out for them. But then when we were looking at the price of building conference rooms and office spaces, we're like, no small business loan we're going to get is going to be able
Will
to cover
cover it.
this
It's
and float a little
hard.
cash.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, the place we ended up going to then had previously been a co-working space. So that was, I would definitely recommend for new co-working places, if they're looking for a location that has already had a co-working space in it, it can be a huge cost savings because,
It can be, except maybe their business didn't work because they didn't have the
oh
right build
yeah,
out or location. So you have to
yes,
dig into that a little
that's
bit.
also a very good point. Yeah, and we definitely brainstormed and ruminated over that for quite a while too.
Okay.
But yeah, having all the networking hardware in place, having all the electrical done,
Yeah.
having conference rooms built, having offices in place, that was a big asset for the space. It's wasn't that wasn't the only thing that convinced us though that this was the right space when we started really diving into the neighborhood around us and how many new high-rise apartments were going up and
Yeah.
what the demographics were in the neighborhood and the type of work that people were doing in the area started to feel like a really good fit because it was, uptown Minneapolis is not where we had been looking. But once our realtors brought us over to this space and we did kind of a deep dive on what was happening there, we felt like it was amazing. And the space itself is very unique and cool. It's kind of fun because it's technically a garden level space,
Okay.
which is a fancy way of saying it's a basement level place.
But do I
But
not see light behind you?
yeah, so
Yeah.
there are almost floor to ceiling windows along the entire east facing side of
So
this
that kind of
level.
removes the challenge with the garden. Yeah, to your
Right.
point, garden would make me nervous, but
Yeah.
and your ceilings, how tall are your ceilings?
They're 12-foot ceilings,
Oh,
so
only
it's
12. Okay.
yeah, pretty good height. I mean, we would have loved
Mhm.
that was one thing that almost ruled us out of the space is we wanted taller ceilings in there,
Yeah.
especially with the gym aspect built in.
Yep.
But it was just tall enough to make it work
To
for what
make
we
it
wanted.
work.
Yep.
Cool. How many square feet is it?
So it's 17,000 square feet.
Ooh, wow. Okay, so I am just a little bit curious. You seem like pretty business savvy for someone who came from a gym background. How did you pick this up?
I think that part of it was that my dad was always an entrepreneur growing
Okay.
up, but then partnering with Bobby, who has
Yep.
owned his own business for almost 15 years now.
Cool.
I mean, that was every time I would have big, exciting ideas, he'd be like, these are the reasons they're not going to work. And this is how we need to fit within our budget. So there's some
He's
good
like
back
the
and
yin
forth
to your
there.
yang. You bring the
Oh, for
energy and
sure.
like the
Yeah.
fresh excitement. He's like, well, here's how that would work out in real life. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I love
And
it.
to speak to the square footage, I mean, we didn't think that we thought this was way too big. Like this was not what we were planning. We were planning something that was 4 to 8,000 square feet at the most,
Yep.
as especially for location one.
Yep.
But once we started talking with some landlords, we found out the situation with the space, that they were excited about our idea and they were willing to work with us. Then we realized, well, this is actually amazing. This we can kind of make all our dreams come true. So the stuff that we thought would need to wait until location 2 or 3, we were able to bring that right
Just
into
do
the
it.
space. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. This is like such a challenging decision for first time space owners because so how many months in are you?
So we are a little past 6 months now. We opened in April.
Okay, so
So
you're still pretty early.
yes,
How do you feel about the space size?
it's amazing. We love
Okay.
it.
You're glad
Yeah.
you went bigger. You're
Oh, for
already
sure. Well,
glad. Okay.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, especially even, I mean, one thing we noticed right away is for larger events, we have all this amazing space and it creates some awesome possibilities. And then also being able to have that size of event is to an extent free advertising for the space. And with a tight budget, as a startup on
Yeah.
location one, anything we can do to market to a big group of people and get them in this space, which is our biggest selling point. Because like you
Seeing the
mentioned a little
space.
bit,
Yeah.
yeah, talking about what the space is, it can be
It's
confusing for
hard.
people, but as soon as
Yep.
they come in, they're like, oh, this totally makes sense. I can see how people would find value in this.
Yeah. So when I work with folks who are starting new spaces, they always say like just like probably your mindset, like let's start like with something we feel like we can chew off. But there's so many limitations to that. Like you just don't have enough inventory to sell. It's like too small. And you can't do specialty things like event space unless the whole space is like convertible. It's really hard. And then I feel like it maybe turns people off from the model a little bit because there's so little upside from a smaller space, depending, there's lots of different ways people approach the model, but it takes some bravery to dive into 17,000 square feet on the first go. So,
Yep, bravery is one word for it. Yeah.
okay. So describe the space for us. You mentioned event space. How does the fitness space fit in? What type of workspace do you offer? Yeah, just kind of like help us visualize.
Yep. So it's 17,000 square feet. It's pretty open concept. The co-working space I was in there previously, they had a lot more walls up that have since came down. And part of that too was trying to foster the community atmosphere in the space, which literally removing walls by nature brings people together, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But so there's a 2,000 square foot event space, and that's a pretty unique
Wow.
area
Yep.
because part of that is kind of our multi-purpose room, which is our yoga room, but
Okay.
then also we call it our lounge for events because it's a pretty open floor plan and we can bring in couches or tables or chairs based on what people need.
Yep.
There's a speakeasy style bar So that's a really cool amenity. The landlords had actually built that out previously. There's a game room with ping pong and a pool table and a retro arcade machine. And there's a theater that can seat up to 40 people.
40
Um,
people. Okay, I saw that on your website or your Instagram, and I was trying to get a read on that one.
yeah, that was stuff that the landlord had already brought into the space. And when we saw it initially, we were kind of
What were
like,
they going to do with it? Were they
well,
like going to
so
run it? What? Yeah.
no, it wasn't. It was never like a business model for them. It was much more that they like to do charity events out of the space. And then they also liked it as just a really cool hangout for them and their friends. So
So did they write into the lease that they still get access if they want?
you know too well. Yes, so they do have some access to the space as needed too, but um they had said that, they thought that they'd maybe use it once a month or once every couple months. I think they've been in one time since we've been open. So I guess, I don't know.
It's
I'm not
totally
complaining about
fine.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no complaints here. But so the rest of the space then, so there's another, 15,000 square feet that's split between the co-working area and the fitness area. The fitness area itself is there's 4,000 square feet of dedicated space. And then
Okay.
there's another probably 2,000 square feet that comes in, and it actually comes in between a lot of the co-working seating.
Yeah, I can see that from the photos.
Yeah, which is, it's something that people are always curious about. But my reasoning for wanting to do it, and I always wanted to do it in whatever space it was, is because having that visual, always being able to see, oh, it's right there. Whenever I want, I can get up, I can stretch out, I can go hang on a
I could whip
bar, I
out
can
some
get on
ring
the
muscle
turf.
ups.
I suppose I don't think a lot of people are hopping out of their desks and doing ring muscle ups,
Okay, but
but
you
that's
do
an
have a
option.
section with some rings hanging
We
pretty high,
do.
right? I
Yes,
was
we
like, oh
do.
my God, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, so we wanted that visual there for people, but then
Yeah,
there is a more dedicated fitness area as well. But yeah, a lot of it's pretty open. I mean, we do have different doors that we can close off to segment the space more. The gym has great sound privacy. There's a full garage door that we can close on it too, because that was always a consideration. I think one of the
totally.
first questions people ask is, if someone's dropping weights,
Right.
50 feet away from me, how am I supposed to be on a Zoom call?
Yeah, exactly. That was always my thing about my CrossFit gym closed during COVID, like forever, because it just was, I don't know, they had too much space, I think, really. And I always thought like, oh, how can we like dual purpose this thing? But A, no windows, B, loud music all the time with weights dropping all the time. Not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, we definitely
Yeah.
have some rules for our members too, during the regular 9 to 5
Yeah.
work hours, to be careful about how they're dropping weights. If they're going to listen to music, just have it on their own headphones.
Headphones. Yeah. Yeah.
And all that sort of thing, where we're being mindful of the people that are working. But it does have great sound privacy, and we fully did the foam acoustic panels on the ceiling. That made a huge difference. I think probably over time we'll add even more of those to the co-working area, since it's such a big open space. But yeah, it's 17,000 square feet. It's a scary amount, but I think we're making use of it well, and now we just need to fill it up with members.
So, okay. So the members can I join only the gym? Yes. I'm
Yeah,
looking at your website now. So I can do gym, or then there are workspace options that include the gym.
yeah. So all the workspace options include all the gym amenities. So they have access 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then there's free fitness and yoga classes for any member or guest every day. But yeah, it's, when we opened, we didn't know what the kind of how the scales were going to tip
Yeah.
with more gym only members or more co-working. But at this point, a little more than 6 months in, it's probably over 90% co-working
Interesting.
and
Yeah.
10% or less that are just fitness only. And I
Huh.
think a big part of that is being a part of the community. People feel much more a part of it when they're in the co-working space as well.
So, do the co-working people, because your membership prices, if I was coaching you, I would tell you to raise them right away, because it looks to me like it's co-working with a free gym membership, basically.
Mhm.
Is that like, or am I missing? Because it's a beautiful space. It's not like you're a 24-hour fitness, it's
Yeah,
gorgeous. So do the people who co-work also use the fitness facilities? Or like what's the percentage there?
they do. I wish they used it more.
More. Yeah.
Some members, that was the reason why they joined our
Yeah.
space is because they were looking for both a workspace and the gym. And every time we give someone like that a tour, it's like the easiest sell ever. They can just see the space and they're like, of course, this makes sense for me. But there's definitely, I would say at least a third of the members don't
At
use
all.
almost any of the fitness amenities, which I'm always surprised about because even just, stretching out a little bit feels so good at
Yeah.
some point during the day, whether, you don't need to change clothes or sweat or anything. So I don't
Totally.
know.
So, I mean, I bet over time you'll probably play with this a little bit because behavior is really hard to change, right? Even if it's sitting in front of you, it's like you just get into this heads down. I even like block out time on my calendar, like walk the dog. And then I don't. I just sit here on my Zoom calls.
Mhm.
So, and I'm like maybe one of the fittest people I know. You're probably, fitter than I am, but in terms of like very committed to like health and fitness. So, what are some of the like nudges? Have you read that book, by the way? I think it's Richard Thaler. Nut. I think it's him. I'll have to look it up. This would be a good book for you if you haven't read it. So, like recess, what are the other things that you do to kind of give people opportunities
Yeah.
during the day, like to
My
work it into the culture?
my book of choice has always been Atomic Habits. Have you read that one before?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's thinking of all the different cues, the way that you can
Yeah.
plan into your day, so that way it happens easily instead of being
Yeah.
a friction point where you're like, oh
Exactly.
man, now I have to get up and work out. Are you kidding me? I was slumped into my chair deep in my work.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, so every day of the work week, we have a noon class, and part of that too is making sure that class is really approachable for people where it doesn't feel like a big transition. So it's only a 20 to 30-minute class, whether it's our recess or our yoga classes. And that way, it's like I don't love yoga myself, even though my wife has been a yoga teacher for a long
Oh,
time.
that's funny.
And the only way I can tolerate it is if it is a shorter class, because otherwise I start to get bored in it. But I think
I know
really,
an hour of like being alone with my thoughts. No, thank you.
yeah, yeah. So I think just like the mentality of, oh, I'm just getting up for 20 minutes to stretch out and make
Yes.
my body feel better and make myself more alert, improve my mental health. That was the selling points for having those noon classes. And they're the most popular classes now,
Ooh,
which is funny
interesting.
because, yeah, previously we had a lot before work and some after work. And after work still does fine. I realized though before work for a lot of entrepreneurs, like they're actually not that interested in getting up at 7 a.m. if they don't have to.
Huh.
So yeah, noon hour seems like a great fit. I think too, I mean, there's a lot of standing desk options in the space. There's treadmill desks
Yep.
that people really like, or I should say there's treadmills, and then I made some nice adapters to go on them so people can be on meetings or
Like
be on
walk
their
and talk.
laptops. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then there's a really cool private courtyard space that we have too. That's all green space.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
think all of that is, really easy
Matters.
options for people to just take
Yep.
care of themselves better during the day.
Wait, have you read Daniel Pink's book, When?
I don't know anything about that.
I'm going to send you the link to it because it'll give you the evidence for all the things that you are already doing, because he talks a lot about even short breaks and even looking at pictures of green things are like huge productivity drivers. So that courtyard space, and even right, like 20 minutes of a break can really set you up for success. And people just like don't do it
Yeah.
on their own. So I mean, yeah, I love that.
Well,
So
you just
yeah.
reminded me of something really kind of obvious with our space too. Is the whole reason we named it the wilderness was because we wanted to fill it up with plants, and
Okay.
and a lot of the desks are live edge tables where it kind of looks like you're more in a
Yeah.
wilderness setting. And then the floor to ceiling windows we had to have so as much natural light as
Yep.
possible. So when you're actually in the space, Well, I wouldn't say that it feels like you're outside, but we're trying to do as best we can in an
Yep,
indoor space, especially where there's Minnesota winters for
totally.
some people would say it's like 9 months out of the year.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you handle like the food aspect? You talked about like people work out and then the rest of the day, maybe they don't make good, food choices or they just sit at their desk and kind of,
Yeah, it
so
is a challenge for sure. And food is such a personal thing to people that we always want to be really careful with how we're
yeah,
recommending people eat or don't eat. So the snacks we try to offer and the coffee and tea and sparkling water, we try to make it be healthy and kind of low impact in their life. And then also we have a healthy vending machine installed.
I saw that on your
Yeah,
Instagram. I was curious about that. Is that a
yeah, it's
local
yeah, it
company or
is. Yeah, it
okay?
was really cool. This is actually their first one that they put in a space, and they're kind of targeting co-working spaces specifically, which I thought was an interesting concept too.
Hmm.
But yeah, check them out, Nosh Posh.
Nosh posh.
Tatiana's the owner. She's amazing. She tries to source all of her products from BIPOC owners, whether it's in the Twin Cities community or throughout the US. But yeah, so that's a great option for people too. And then, I mean, we try to make good recommendations when people are like, hey, where should we go get food today? But at the end of the day, it's their choice what they're going to do. But again,
Totally.
we just try to give them healthy options that are as
Yeah.
accessible as possible.
I think one of the things I found as an owner was, well, co-working culture, I would say is not that healthy. Lots of
I agree.
lots of carbs.
Yep,
Yeah,
I
lots
agree.
of like, let's get everybody donuts on Friday. Um, oh, we had a space upstairs from us that was more of an executive suite, and they had the big jar of candy on the front desk, which drives me nuts because it's really hard to walk by that, and like it
Yep.
adds up. And the free snacks are always like very just like processed food, basically. It is hard to avoid that. And also from a budget perspective, it's like when you're doing a member event, bringing in $14 salads for everybody is really hard. And I always
Yeah.
struggled with like pizza's cheap and it's not a healthy option. I mean, in balance, right? Of course, I eat pizza. I ate some of my daughter's Halloween candy this morning. Like I'm not saying I'm like totally crazy, but trying to really create that holistic culture, like it's hard to, you got to sort of pick some values and stick to them a little bit, while to your point, like finding some middle ground.
I know the first couple times members brought in treats to share with people, I
Right.
was like
You're like, what
sweating.
do
I'm
I
like,
do with
I
this?
know.
Do I let them? Do I not? I can
Yeah.
remember like somebody brought in like a cake early on, like a full-on cake, and I was like, oh my god,
Mhm.
contraband.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall it's good for community building. And again, it's not like having a treat now and then is a bad thing. It's good to
Totally,
have
exactly.
moderation in
Especially
people's
if you're,
lives.
getting active during the day and
Yeah,
yep.
I've come to terms with it. I think it's a good thing overall.
Yeah, super interesting. Okay, so back to kind of the mix of your space. I get very anxious when people have so much open space. So how many offices do you have? Like private offices that people can rent?
So we have 10 team offices. I don't call them private because they do still have a wall that's not closed off,
Okay.
which is a challenge too. And we've gone back and forth on whether it's worth putting in the money to close all those off, which I still
Yeah.
don't think we have a definitive
Yeah.
answer in place for that. But right now it's working all right. But yeah, then there's another about 15 dedicated desks.
Yep.
And all the rest is open desk seating. So we've definitely leaned heavily into the open desk seating. An interesting thing is all the dedicated desks are full. So we're adding more now.
That is super interesting because I will tell you, like, that is so market specific and maybe specific to like the kind of people you attract. It's a hard
Yeah.
one to know, like, how far to lean into those. Do they sell? Do they not sell? So interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if it follows kind of the same trend that I've seen with some other places where the micro office or having
Yeah.
really like your own little dedicated
Yeah.
space is very valuable to people. Because I feel like if it trends that way, we'll keep leaning into that more.
Yeah. Although the micro office is really a totally different product because you have sound privacy. Whereas
That's
the
a good point.
dedicated, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the dedicated desk, although possibly what you're seeing is that because you don't have micro offices, people are like, well, okay, let me make this work.
Yeah, that
So
was what I was thinking, but maybe I just don't have a big enough sample size yet either.
yeah, totally. How big are your team offices? How many people do
Um,
they seat?
so it's 2 to 6 people. It's
Okay.
kind of interesting too because the offices are on a one wall is on a huge track system for each of the offices, so it can all get pushed to the size that people need. So I
Oh,
suppose we could have like a 15-person office
yep.
if that was if there was a need for that.
Got it. That's
Yeah,
an interesting system. How so, but there's not also not full sound privacy in that
right.
system. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's really flexible and it creates kind of that visual privacy.
Yep,
Yep.
for sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. We'll have to check in like a year and see if you're going to build more walls.
Yep, that would be a good question to ask.
Okay, but let's talk about, I'm curious also about monetizing the event space because also it's hard, I think, traditionally to recommend that people dedicate some of their space to event space, because if you can't monetize it, then you're in trouble. But post COVID, sort of the meeting, gathering, people with a lot of event space are actually doing really well. So it's like there's a risk there, but then there could be a lot of upside. You're only 6 months in. 6 months is like baby stage.
Yep.
So yeah, totally. I mean, for any, so we won't hold you to, it's still very early. You're just really like getting started and opening. But yeah, what are you seeing so far? I mean, your event spaces, if anybody wants, we'll put your website online. It's thewildernessmn.com, but the event space is very cool. And I mean, there are 3 different, to your point, like sort of the movie, the bar. So yeah, how are those getting used, or how do you think that will start to trend, and will it be a significant revenue source?
Yeah, our business plan initially only intended on doing kind of internal member events. And so we
Hmm.
hadn't been planning on event rental as part of our business model, but with this specific space, we were like, well,
Yeah,
I mean, it's absolutely perfectly
yeah,
set up for it. It can be totally closed off where we could have events at any time and not have it be a disruption to members. So it was an easy choice to move into that. And it's funny though, because I didn't know anything about event
right.
rentals or how
It's
to
like a
market
totally
it or
different
how,
business.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And so it started off really slow for us. And now it is picking up big time. It's a huge driver for us. I think we priced ourselves right kind of at the bottom of the market for event rentals, but our space is so unique and versatile that people are really attracted to it.
yeah.
So yeah, now we're doing amazing. Now it's, gosh, at the start, we would get one event rental a month, and now
Okay.
there's multiple every week, and it's a
Yeah.
huge revenue driver.
Yep. Yeah. Which is that, yeah, super interesting and probably compensates for your lack of private space to some extent. Because private space is
Compensates.
usually what sells really fast, right? And brings in the cash
Yeah.
flow. And that's usually why I tell people you got to, you got to have private space, because otherwise, how you're going to pay your rent on 17,000 square feet. So, um, interesting. So, are you seeing, is there event rental that incorporates the fitness aspect, or is it okay?
Yep. Yeah. So on weekends, as long as we're giving our members enough forewarning, we do
Yeah.
rent out the entire space. And we've had a number of events where they're really excited about incorporating the fitness part of the space. I mean, I feel like I feel like every like third event rental, they're asking if we offer any type of guided
Right.
class
The
experience
team
with it,
building. Yeah, exactly.
which
Yeah.
a lot of times ends up with me doing it.
Right.
If only I
You're
could
like, let me
delegate
see
that
if I
work
am
better.
free. Yeah.
Yeah, for real. But yeah, I think, I mean, people are attracted to that too. A good example is maybe about a month ago now, we had a chiropractic consulting company reach out to us. And so they wanted to bring in 40 chiropractors from all over the US. And part of their kind of workshop that they were doing was having multiple workouts each day. And so they
Interesting.
were really excited about being able to come into our space
Yeah.
and do their breakout sessions, but
Yeah.
then
And there's
also
like nowhere else they
get
can
a
do it.
guided class.
Like,
Yeah. I
yeah.
know. I thought about that in hindsight. I'm like, man, could not be a
Like,
better
yeah.
location for what they
And
want
you
to
have to
do.
raise your prices, because when people see your event, it's like, it's not like, well, let me think about it. It's like, oh my God, that's the place for me. And when you get that reaction, you can charge more for it.
That's probably
Yeah.
true. I
So
don't
don't be
know
bottom of the
best way
market
to do
anymore. Work
that.
on, Are you working on like, so how do you market events now, or how are people finding you?
So just in the last couple months, we've started marketing it more heavily with the intent of, with the holiday season, there's going to be a bigger drive for it, whether
Yeah.
it's individual or corporate type
Yep.
events. And we've seen the growth with that. So we're
Yeah.
pretty happy that we're putting more time and effort into that part of the business.
Are you running ads or kind of doing organic marketing?
Anything and everything that we can afford. Yeah, my
Yeah.
wife is a marketing consultant, so
And a yoga teacher. Perfect combination.
yeah, yeah,
Does she teach classes at the
he
space?
does.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny because she actually hadn't for a couple of years with COVID. Besides like the occasional
Right.
virtual class, I think this has been a really low key, low pressure way to do it, where the classes are shorter and it's a fun group of people that she gets to see on a regular basis. Yeah.
Okay. What did she think when you said I'm going to sign a lease for 17,000 square feet?
Well, she knows that I'm generally a very risk averse
Okay.
person. So if I was serious about this, she knew that I really did my homework on the situation. So I think she felt pretty comfortable. Like she was probably more comfortable with it than I was actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember my husband when I was getting ready to sign my lease and mine came with a personal guarantee. He was like, "So if this doesn't work, do we live there? Like, what do we do?"
Yeah. We
Gonna
had
work.
that conversation too, because I mean, we have a personal guarantee as well. And
You do.
that
Okay.
was stressful to me. It was stressful
Yes.
to Bobby, our
Yep.
co-owner. But I mean, we've come to terms with it, and that just means we have to work that much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Yeah. It was super. I think that was the thing that gave my husband like real pause,
Yep.
because that's pretty legit. Although interestingly, I had a conversation with a group in Texas yesterday, and they're attorneys, and they said the personal guarantee is not very enforceable in Texas. Like you can't really take someone's house. You can take their boats and extra cars, but it's very hard to take someone's home. So I thought that was interesting. I did not have that feeling.
I'll just tell
when
people that Jamie told me that if this scenario ever comes up.
only in Texas. I mean, that's why that's like my motto, only in Texas.
Yeah.
Not in the Midwest, where I think things maybe are a little more, who knows, but anyway, super,
Yeah.
very state specific. And that was interesting, kind of to hear.
Mhm.
So, so 6 months in, what's going well and what is like kind of a surprise?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on some of it. So one thing that, man, I would really love your advice on is our offices. And maybe that I'm sure it is in part due to them not being fully privatized, where we've only sold half of them.
Yeah.
And so that would be a big revenue booster to be able to start
Get
filling
those.
that up
Yep.
more significantly. The dedicated desks have been a huge success.
Yeah.
We're adding more now, so we're super excited about that. I think one thing that we're always trying to get better at is our community building, and that's been a really exciting to see and I think too, it helps where it's a little bit of a niche um, co-working business, even though I do
Kind
think, I
of
mean,
like-minded people are
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
drawn together
absolutely.
already. Yeah.
It's fun too because it's people who are maybe like a little bit weird in the sense that they're not afraid to, or part of it is a culture we try to build is where we don't want people to be nervous about like squatting in front of their laptop, like walking around barefoot,
Okay.
be like being
Yeah.
comfortable, nurturing themselves, like doing whatever they need to have good mental and physical health in the space and not be judgmental about it.
Yep.
Some people when they come in, they like right away they know like, oh, these are my people, like this is going to be the perfect fit for me, and I don't have to say anything. And it's funny because
Right.
it's
Take
almost
my
like
money.
they give me the tour. They're like start
Right.
pointing out all the reasons why it's good, and I'm always like, oh, can I have you give the tour to people? This is amazing. Yeah.
That's so funny. I mean, I love that about niche spaces because I do think that is, I mean, I look at even just looking at your photos, I just want to sit at one of those desks with the rings above them and the yeah, I mean, and go to recess, and that would be I would just, I don't even know if I'd need a tour. I would just sign up online and come and start working in the plants, that I can see in the photos and all of that. So Yeah. What, yeah. So offices, I mean, I think, yeah, the reality is private spaces tend to fill up fast because people need private space. So you are selling to people who, don't actually require workspace outside of home, probably, unless it's because they have, kids and dogs and distractions, but like their business itself doesn't require an office. So it's discretionary income by nature, which is a harder sell.
Yep, you
So
pretty much
exactly.
hit the nail on the head with that.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
so, I mean, so I love that you're unique and compelling because I think that is helping you. If you were just a generic space with 17,000 feet and 10 offices, you would not make it. That's probably why that space didn't
yeah.
make it, by the way.
I
That's my
well,
guess.
there's extenuating
Okay.
circumstances with that,
Got
but
it.
I,
Yeah.
I, I do I do agree that if we weren't filling a specific need, I mean, if we weren't, we just wouldn't have opened the space this large either because
Exactly. Yes, you had a purpose. You had a reason for doing it the way you're doing it. Yeah.
yeah,
And I think it may be like your dedicated desk. People also think they need privacy. And that's a cultural thing you can manage too. I talk about her all the time. Sarah Travers from Work Bar was on the Flex Uncensored podcast, and they have neighborhoods where you can talk loudly and neighborhoods where you're focusing, and you have enough space that you probably could do that too.
yep,
But if you have six people and they're part of for a team space and they're part of a company, it just probably is a perception that they think they need walls and ceilings. And yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
some of it's not reality, but it's like their perception, and who buys those? Some of those would be enterprise people. If Target has a special project team that they want to put in your space, they want walls.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
full walls and full soundproofing.
you're totally right because
Yeah.
we don't have very many companies like larger than a couple people working in the space, and that's something that we've struggled with because we know, if one company of 10 people joins, compare that to 10 individual people
Right.
joining. It's like
It's like the cash flow
yeah,
injection is immediate and it compounds, right, over
yep,
a year. So it's a big deal. And I would think, I mean, I had like a fraction of what you have because I just had the studio and we did some classes in the morning. We actually did meditation classes. They were also only 10 or 20 minutes and people loved those, surprisingly. This was a very long time ago, but um, people felt good if they had employees, that was a huge benefit to them, that there was like fitness, that was a healthy work environment. So I would think that would be very sellable. And Minneapolis is such a great co-working market because there's a lot of big companies that have budgets for space and meetings and all of those things. So I would guess that'd be a big sell, and that need to do gatherings and have budgets for that stuff. So yeah, you might at some point just start squirreling away money to fully enclose those spaces.
yeah. I mean, right now the sell that we try to offer for companies is that their productivity is going to increase because
Yeah.
their mental and physical health is being
Yeah.
nurtured when they're in the space. But that's always like a more like lofty of a vision
Yeah, it's
when
aspirational. Which
yeah,
I love. I mean, I love the
yeah,
aspirational sell. Honestly, I mean, I think some of co-working is practical and some of it is aspirational, right? Like I want to be in a place where I'm inspired and I run into interesting people, like all of that sort of it's the aspirational piece. And then some people are like, yeah, I just need a place where I can take phone calls and no one hears me. So
yeah.
that that's the practical side of things, which is, tricky, but you have time. And how long is your lease?
So we have a 2-year lease but we already have built into the lease that we can extend it an additional 3 years and then plus another 5 years on top of that
Okay,
if we
you've got
choose
time.
to. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have to adjust to market rent rates at each of those like trigger points?
We do. So that'll be a fun. I was funny. I was telling people that like, oh, we get along so great with our landlords, and like we really feel like they understand our vision and they're willing to work with us. But we'll see how good of friends we are when that 3-year
Exactly.
mark comes
When
up
you
and
have to
that three.
negotiate. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it could go well or not, depending on how commercial real estate is doing.
yeah.
You might get
Right.
lucky because usually that's a really tricky, you should just lock in, but you might be okay because commercial real estate is probably still going to be on the, occupancy will be declining, I suspect, in 2 years. So you might be okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
also, I mean, we wanted a shorter lease term for this first two because to an extent it was an unproven business model, and we
Yeah.
wanted to manage that risk aspect as best we could. So we kind of thought it was a best case scenario where we're locked in for 2, and then we have optional
You
extensions
have the
after that.
options. Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
will say too, it just for anybody listening who may not line up with those, is if you put a lot of money into a build out, like you can't pay it off in 2 years. So if you needed to get out, not only like you just lose all the money that you put in, you won't make you might have been in a different position because you didn't do a lot of build out, which most people don't. That's not, you would be out furniture and fixtures and that stuff, which theoretically you could sell, not for, much, but some, if you had to get out. But for most people, if you're going to take 17,000 feet and you're putting in, you're doing a build out, then you got to have a 10-year lease. And the problem with like marking to market is if you're in a gentrifying neighborhood, your rent could go up significantly, enough to like not make the model work anymore. I had that in my Chicago space. I was in the West Loop. I had renewals that were not based on market rent, just one. I had one like kind of check in the middle of 10 years because Google put their Chicago office down the street and the whole neighborhood just turned. So market
Yep.
rent went through the roof, and I don't think my model would have worked if I had to mark to market. So just for people listening, yours is different because you didn't do a significant build out, so that works.
Yeah, those are great points though, for sure.
Yeah, I just always like for people listening who are like 2-year lease, I love it because when people start spaces, they're just trying to reduce risk, so they want small space and short lease. But actually, for a business to work, those are two things you don't actually want. So, okay, so what is your 6 months in? I'm guessing you're doing a lot of things, but so you have you mentioned at the beginning, part-time community manager, you run some classes.
Yeah.
Who's on site? What does it look like?
So I'm on site, feels like most days of
All
the
the
week.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. For some part of the day, I'm almost always checking in and doing this or that, and changing light bulbs, making sure the toilets are working how they need to, cleaning up this, like tidying up the space constantly. But I mean, we've reached a pretty good balance with maybe excluding me, like what our other employees and what our owner Bobby does. And, Bobby's in there 1 day a week on site, and then he's doing a lot of the financials and back end stuff
Okay.
on his own time at home.
Yep.
And our community manager Hannah is in there 3 to 4 days a week, and she's amazing. She actually, part of her background is in event planning, so that's been such a
Ooh,
huge
dreamy.
asset.
Yeah.
And she's just super organized, so she's like a huge blessing to have in here. And then having my wife have a background, in marketing, and also being a very organized, proactive person. Like all of these things are shoring up the weaknesses I have. So that all plays together really well. The tricky thing, in fact, probably our biggest friction point, is that since a lot of us do a lot of things in the space, it'll often be like, oh, I thought you were in charge of this. Oh, I want to make this decision on this, and you disagree with me. Well, who's the one who's in charge of this? Which part of that we manage by doing that traction style of business management, and that does help a lot. But there's definitely been some tough conversations about whose role it is to do this or that.
Yeah.
So growing pains, right?
Do you have an operating agreement between you and your business partner that like
We do.
specifies like, yeah, but sometimes that's more like what happens if we break up?
Yeah.
Yeah. And not
But
necessarily who gets to pick the coffee or who gets to decide what
Right.
classes we run or how much we charge for things or
Yeah. I would actually say, him and we have a pretty clearly defined work relationship, and most of the friction is not between him and I. It's a lot of times where, with our community manager, with my wife, and there's a lot of different roles happening. And
Yeah.
so sometimes, if someone's not on the payroll for something, and then they're trying to decide like who needs to be responsible for this. So, I mean, there's
Yeah,
Lots of fun conversations to have to figure that all
totally.
out.
No,
Yeah.
it's right. You're figuring it all out. So is the goal to do more locations? What's the big picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of markets that we've already identified would be well suited for what we have. I
Burlingame,
mean,
California, please.
California real estate sounds so intimidating to get
It's
into.
so intimidating. I know. But
Yeah.
maybe a management agreement. I think, who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
knows?
That's a good point.
I'll start looking for locations for you.
Please do. Yeah, I think that it's tricky because again, it's not a super proven model. We feel like though in some ways it's such an obvious concept.
Yeah.
I mean, a workspace that is catering to people's mental and physical health seems like something that should have been in place right from the beginning of co-working. So to push for it now is great because there's less education for the general public of what co-working actually means.
True. Oh
So
my gosh, I know when I started. What did my husband say? Oh, I think he wanted me to leave the wellness part out. I think he
yeah,
was like,
I
it's too
understand.
much. You just
Yeah.
need to talk about workspace. It's too much to tell people all the things and what you're, and I was like, gotta think about that.
I mean, I
I mean, this
kind
was
of,
in
I kind of agree
2012.
with that though,
Yeah.
because that's like a big battle that we, and it's part of it too, is that our fitness is also like a little alternative.
Okay.
It's because, I mean, so you could walk in and do a full CrossFit workout and be so happy with the space and all the offerings there. But also the classes that we teach, recess is non-traditional. It's not like sweat a lot and get it.
Yeah.
It's more like treat your body with
I
respect
could
and
see your
leave feeling
videos,
better.
but I feel like that's
Yeah.
really approachable for a broader population.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's always funny with people who are explaining, what we do, and they're not gym people. And we're like, actually, this space is for the non-gym people. This is for
Yeah.
people who don't want to go into a regular gym and deal with that culture. That this is
Yeah.
much more accepting and inclusive of anyone coming, from any type of fitness or lack of fitness background, and people who have never prioritized their health before.
Yep. I love that. Yeah. And that it's like a cultural shift though. So, right. We're still, I totally agree with you. It makes 100% sense. And I think it's the people who I was in for the GWA conference was in Dallas, next to the Cowboy Stadium. And Jerry Jones put in, I think it's called Cowboy Fit. And I thought it was going to be more of like a CrossFit style. It's really like a gym, and I hadn't been in like a gym in so long. And I was like, what do all these people like do? Because you have to go in and like, you have to know what you're going to do. It's very independent. Like you have to have a plan. Most people have no idea like how to plan. I don't even know. I follow programming. Even when I work out on my own, like I have a thing that says what I do every day, an app, it's like the app with the workout in it. So that it's like a very specific person that goes to a gym and like
Yeah.
makes up their own stuff. Right. So I think most people probably want what you're doing.
But you're also touching on a bigger conversation too. I'm sure we could talk a long time about
Yeah.
that as well, because I have some, after being in the fitness industry for a long time,
Yeah.
I have some pretty well-formed, justified opinions about the things that are going well and not well for the general
Yeah.
public with how they can take care of themselves.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, that's what influenced us opening this type of
Yeah.
space. That was
Want
part
to
of it.
like make a dent in that
Yeah.
big challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yep.
sure.
Totally. Okay. Well, that's it for now. We have to check in with you in like maybe like a year. We'll check in and see like, how things are going, what's changed, if we can franchise or, what the expansion model is going to look like. What do you think? Will you do your own locations or any sense of what the expansion model will look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. Like I said, the gym I'd worked at previously, they did go into a franchising model, and I see a lot of benefits to that. But also, we like to control the narrative a little bit more,
Yeah.
maybe. So it might not be the best idea. And also, we just like a slow growth strategy in general. So we'll see, though. We have to prove this model first. We're just
We're
babies.
only 6 months in, totally.
Yeah, we're still learning to walk.
We'll give you some time. Okay, thank you for sharing your story and your insights. Super interesting. I'm going to put your website and your Instagram, and we'll put a link to the I'm going to make a note right now to the Blue Zones stuff in there as well if people are curious about that. And we look forward to checking in again and seeing how things are going.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I've listened to so many of your episodes that it's really been a pleasure talking with you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben.